am Loretta Rowley. I am a PhD student in the Department of Communication and one of the graduate assistant coaches for the John R. Park Debate Society.
I'm Shad Wojciechowski. I'm currently an undergraduate here at the University of Utah, and I'm a competitor on the debate team here.
My name's Shaylee Tulane. I'm a senior here at the University of Utah, majoring in gender studies, poli-sci, and communications.
And I'm Layne. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Communication and also one of the assistant coaches for the John R. Park Debate Society.
We are here to discuss last night's primary debate. So I guess we'll address, what did they call it, the elephant not in the room? Yeah. So Donald Trump was not there last night, which I think was a refreshing difference to see what it would look like without the kind of attention seeker on stage. So what did you guys think?
I thought it was really interesting. I felt like more of the candidates felt comfortable making arguments because they didn't feel like they had Trump in the background kind of making his snide comments. But I also feel like a lot of these candidates had a lot more speaking time. So you saw a lot more, especially from certain senators that we haven't heard from, and also some of the governors that are in the debate.
I think Jeb Bush and Chris Christie got way more speaking time than they've had in other debates.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually kind of nice to see them not having to respond to Trump, but actually get to go on the offensive and talk about issues that they hadn't quite got to talk about. I don't know if they did that quite well, but they definitely got to have a little bit more speaking time. So I think that combined with more issues was really benefit to them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the biggest critiques most people have about the Republican debates is that they haven't been so much issue-based as much as attack-based. And I think this debate we actually saw some real issue-based conflicts come out, but also really what these candidates want to do for people of Iowa, but also the United States.
I think that's especially true with the topic of immigration. That was a really big turning point for a lot of this debate, where we finally, instead of having just attacks, and mostly ad hominem attacks, right, just name calling, instead we had a lot of more specific discussion about inconsistencies, which I think is a really important component to understanding the nuances of these people's positions.
Especially when it comes to Rubio and Cruz. Cruz has always been on the offensive, saying that he's against amnesty, but then there's several videos that kind of come out and say that he isn't, that he has supported a path to citizenship. Same with also Christie and Rubio. I think it was really interesting to see these inconsistencies come up and see how these debaters kind of handled it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the debate, Shad?
I thought it was good, definitely more substantial than ever before. One of the interesting things that I really saw coming out of it was this whole establishment versus non-establishment component of it. So we had the governors like John Kasich and of course Chris Christie just touting their record as governors and the things that they've done. And we also had these non-establishment, or at least what they call themselves non-establishment, like Ted Cruz, coming out and basically just saying that they're anti-Washington and things like that. So really just going in and kind of having this interesting contrast between those two, and I guess just kind of trying to leave it up to the voters of Iowa of which they like more. But I thought that was an interesting contrast that we saw throughout the whole debate.
I think one of the interesting things for me about the debate is typically when you think about the debate, you think about the debaters debating in the debate. But this particular debate was more about not just about the performances of the debaters, not about the performance of the audience, but also about the performance of the moderator. Megyn Kelly was performing for her life in the debate. She was coming across as tough as nails, wearing, because Donald Trump wasn't even there, as a gold star, the fact that he wasn't there. I think that that's really important because the way that she kind of moderated the debate had a real effect in the way that people were asking questions, the speaking time to a large degree, the interaction between her and Governor Kasich was particularly noteworthy because he had a level of expertise on one of the questions, and instead of allowing him to respond to something that was particularly important to his particular campaign, instead it was a focus on, no, we're going to move to domestic terrorism. Even the way that she was asking questions specific candidates was more trying to create conflict rather than understand the nuance of the positions. I think the moderation was really interesting, especially when compared to things like the Democratic primary debates, which have been more focused on trying to detail nuance. But I'm not quite sure what they were going for. If that's the way that happens, what do you think?
I think Megyn Kelly was kind of selective on what they wanted to stick some of the candidates to and what they let slide. One of the examples was a question aimed at Marco Rubio that was asking his how he would unite the Republican Party, and the way he responded was kind of a tangent into Hillary Clinton can't win. And so by the end of the question, it was, I would oppose Hillary Clinton and unite the party. And so he answered the question without any actual substance, and rather than kind of sticking him on the how, she let it go and asked the next question. So it was very interesting to see what lack of kind of substance answers were allowed to kind of slide versus what ones were interrogated more.
So I think the other part of moderation that kind of played out is they decided to enforce the rules for some candidates, but not enforce those rules on terms of, answering the question for other candidates. I think that the top tier candidates got to play loose and fast and answer questions if they wanted to, or didn't have to answer questions if they wanted to, and most of the times they just didn't answer the question. While the lower tier candidates, to ensure that they got speaker time and more speaking time, had to answer the question, which seemed really unfair, at least in terms of, moderating the debate in a fair and equitable way.
I felt like the top tier debaters in this debate felt like they were kind of entitled to have that type of speaking time, especially with Ted Cruz, when he almost said that he was going to leave because he was getting mean questions. So I think something that was really interesting in this debate is you didn't have the Donald Trump, but rather you had people kind of fighting to be that bully in this debate.
Well,
Yeah.
After Donald Trump, Ted Cruz is the next highest in the polls right now. And so on that stage, he essentially took the role of frontrunner. But I think the way that he kind of had some mean question from them and mean question from them, I almost would read that as hurting him, because it's possible to read that interaction as he can't handle being the target of criticism in that frontrunner position. So I think ultimately that probably hurt him and made Marco Rubio have a stronger night to the Iowa audience.
Who do you think won, Shad?
Probably Marco Rubio, just because he had the most speaking time and he really probably made the most logical arguments, I would say, in the case of appealing to the more evangelical voters that the Iowa caucus is so important of capturing. So I would say probably Marco Rubio, just because of that logical appeal that he had. Most likely won the debate.
Who do you think, Shaylee?
I was actually going to say Marco Rubio too. I think he had his best debate this night. Not only was he on the offense of making really good arguments and also talking about certain policies, but also he did bring more of that evangelical, more right-winged vote to the debate, which I think he hasn't really done in previous debates. So it was really nice to see him not only stand in the middle ground where he has kind of felt more at home, but also pour more of that right side.
What about you, Loretta?
I think I'm going to go wild card and say that I just have a soft spot for Governor Kasich and for Rand Paul. I don't think they necessarily won that night, but they both had the strongest debate participation out of all of the debates they've had. And so I would say that I just really enjoy both of their candidacies, but it's not enough at this point. It's a little too late. I think all of the candidates had a really strong night without Trump, but it was the last debate. So it was almost a competition for second and third, as opposed to a kind of real chance at the Republican nomination. What about you?
Well, I will tell you who didn't win the debate. Ted Cruz definitely did not win that debate. Ted Cruz really had a tough night. It almost seemed like he was melting down at points, getting into a conflict with the moderator Wallace, trying to really deal with offensive questions toward him and aggressive questions towards him. I don't know if he really stood up to the medal, as it were, to really get and show the American people, especially Republican primary voters, that he's really up to the task. Other than that, I think everyone else won. Definitely had a better night. The other entity that we kind of started with and maybe are ending with is that Donald Trump not being there is really interesting. I'm really interested to see how that plays out right before next week's Iowa caucuses, because you never know who's actually watching these debates. So once we get, I guess, the preliminary tail of the tape in terms of the people that were watching the Trump rally versus watching the Republican debate, will make a huge difference in the kinds of arguments that, I guess, come out in the waning moments right before those votes take place in Iowa.
Especially with the recent information about Trump's rally, about how the money he did earn from that sponsorship with specifically for veterans is actually funneling through his campaign rather than going directly to veterans. I think that could be very damaging to his campaign, because not only does he not go to this debate, but also there is a risk that he is not being as transparent. And since this debate and all this election has been so focused on transparency, especially with Hillary, I think that could really damage him by not being at this debate and being very clear about it, but also having this risk of false campaign financing.
I think it's going to be an interesting road. We've got a couple more days left before we hit the first primary, and in fact the first caucus. So it's really going to be interesting to see how these final arguments play out.
Well, especially when the Iowa caucus winner is kind of a mixed bag on whether that's a good or a bad thing. I think it's 3 and 4 out of kind of the last 7 have gone on to win it, and others believe there's like the Iowa curse that if you win that caucus that you actually don't become the party's nominee for Republicans. So I mean, regardless of whether Trump wins Iowa, it still might not mean that he's going to have the Republican nomination. So time will tell, I guess.
Any final thoughts, Shad?
No, I mean, I thought it was a good debate. I thought it was definitely more substantial than any of the other Republican debates that we've seen so far this year, which has allowed more people to get their thoughts out. And I thought it was definitely an interesting contrast to have a Trump rally happening at the same time as the debate. So definitely it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out for the Iowa voters and what they kind of view as the whole setup there of who they like better, and if they believe this whole Trump rally with the veterans, or if they're going to go more this kind of traditional route of what we've normally seen.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I think that we'll continue to be watching the debates as they play out. Hopefully Iowa limits some of these candidates down so that we get more thorough discussions, because I guess eliminating one person from the main card event did wonders to at least getting to understand what kinds of nuances in their policy positions there are.
I agree.